This is the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria, session number 5.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Hey everyone, it's Matt Sikoria here. Thanks for joining me for another session of the Behavioral Observations Podcast. I've got a great interview lined up for you guys today, but I want to make a few quick announcements before we get into it. First of all, I am continuing to be blown away and humbled by all the feedback that I've been getting from you guys. I've gotten lots of emails. People are writing in just to say hello. A lot of fellow kind of what I call super commuters, people who spend an ungodly amount of time in their cars going to schools and clinics and all over the place. I've gotten some emails from folks that have also suggested some future guests, and I'm definitely going to take action on that. So please continue with writing in. I want to make this as interactive of a process as possible. So there's a couple of different ways you can do that. One is to go check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations. I'm also on Twitter at Behavior Podcast. So let's connect at one of these outlets or another. You can also reach me, as most people have thus far, at behavioralobservations.com and just click the contact tab and you can reach me pretty easily. And since we last talked, I've continued to get a lot more reviews on iTunes. I just want to give a quick shout out to a couple of you who have taken the time to give a rating and review on iTunes. In particular, I want to mention LDC, K-Liz. Let's see, we've got, like last time, we've got a couple of cool names here. We've got, future BCBA. That's pretty cool. We've got a lot of students of applied behavior analysis who listen to this show. But a couple others, Misbehavin'. That's a classic one. I love that. And then this one I think is my favorite, Passion for Graphing. Oh man, that is a behavior analytic handle if I have ever seen one. So guys, please continue to keep the ratings and reviews coming in if you haven't done it thus far. It just takes a minute, and it really helps this podcast stand out from the thousands of podcasts that are out there. You know, I was looking at the iTunes charts the other day, and I was really psyched to see that we were ranked not just in the social sciences, but also in the general science and medicine category. And so if you consider all the other podcasts that are out there in that particular genre, man, that's a pretty cool accomplishment. And that does not happen without you guys. You guys doing the downloading, you guys listening, you guys rating and reviewing and all that stuff. So I can't thank you. It's also important in the context of what else is out there. I think the podcast that was next to the Behavioral Observations podcast on the iTunes new and noteworthy page had something to do with Sasquatch. And oddly enough, it was in the science and medicine category. So maybe down the line, iTunes will create a pseudoscience category where such a podcast might be more appropriate. But anywho, long story short, the ratings and reviews help us stand out from a lot of the other stuff that's out there. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I will also be making a few announcements to the mailing list. So if you're not on that, head over to behavioralobservations.com. And eventually a pop-up box will shoot up on the screen. And if you just plug in your email address, you'll be on the list. Now, I don't know about you, but I get tons of emails that are pretty annoying from various companies, whether it's Amazon or Eastern Mountain Sports or Target or whatever. I get a ton of those things. Now, I promise you this is not going to be like that. I use this email list quite sparingly, but I do want to use it in a way to kind of interact with you guys. So if you're not on the mailing list, go over to behavioralobservations.com and sign up. And we're going to probably send out a couple of emails in the next little bit. But again, it's nothing that's so frequent that's going to clog up your inbox or anything like that. So anywho, again, go over to behavioralobservations.com and check it out. So for the purposes of today's show, I'm bringing you an interview that I conducted with Dr. Todd Ward of bside21.org. You've heard me talk about bside21.org for the last couple of episodes. They've been a very solid sponsor of the Behavioral Observations podcast. And rather than go into what bside21.org does as a spot, if you will, or a sponsorship read or advertisement, I'm going to let the interview kind of stand on its own. I do want to mention, for those of you who are concerned about these sorts of things, I conducted this interview way before we even agreed to do any type of sponsorship arrangement. So this was just me reaching out to Todd, and Todd being really generous with his time. He told me about how he got into behavior analysis, what it was like to bridge the gap between his budding career in communications and behavior analysis, what it was like to start bside21.org, and he gets into some other stories as well that are pretty interesting. For example, he was on the air broadcasting during the 9/11 attacks, and so he goes in to tell us about what that experience was like, and he also tells us about some of his experiences traveling internationally to various behavior analytic conferences and things like that. So it's an interesting interview, and he goes into a lot of different areas, and also ends up giving some really sage advice at the very end for aspiring behavior analysts. So you're going to really like this interview with a really great guy. So without any further ado, please enjoy this episode with Dr. Todd Ward of bside21.org. Hey, Todd. Thanks for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. So I'm talking to you, and you're in Texas right now, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, go ahead.
Around McKinney, Texas, so it's just north of Dallas-Fort Worth.
Okay. I appreciate the clarification for those of us who don't get down to that neck of the woods too frequently. And so I know from the CV that you sent me, you did your undergraduate and graduate work in Texas as well. Is that correct?
Yes, at Stephen F. Austin State University.
So how did you get into psychology and behavior analysis and things like that?
Great question. So I initially went into college as a broadcasting major, radio and television. And I did that for a few years. And I really was into music a lot, and I sort of wanted to work on the radio. And I even got to the point where I was interning at a radio station in a town. So Stephen F. Austin is in a town called Nacogdoches in East Texas. It's about an hour west of the Louisiana border. And there's a larger town south of there called Lufkin. And so I was interning at a radio station there, me and another guy. And we were doing, our main job was to broadcast football games, high school football games from the studio. And so we'd do that on Friday nights. And we'd be calling up different schools from around East Texas. And then at halftime, me and my friend would come on and do a little show, basically recapping the football game that we were broadcasting and then giving updates on scores around the region. So that was cool. And coincidentally, 9/11 happened when I was working on the radio. So I actually got to broadcast the events of 9/11 as they were progressing on the radio.
No way.
For better or for worse. Yeah, I did.
That must have been absolutely surreal.
It was, yeah. I remember it vividly,
Of course.
So
now, what was it like? I have to imagine you had to, because I remember, of course, that's one of those events where everyone remembers where they were, right?
Yeah.
I was in the middle of a MANT training class in the basement of a group home. and it was just one of those weird things that people just kind of always remember where they are. But I imagine for someone in a media position, especially being on the air with so little information, you had to probably spend a lot of time just kind of.
There was all kinds of rumors. I remember we had on the news just like everyone else, and we were basically just reporting on the radio what we were hearing from the news, and there was all sorts of rumors about car bombs going off at the White House and all this craziness. So yeah, I did that for a while, and then.
Oh, can I, before we move on, I got to ask one more question. Is there audio footage of that still? I don't know if footage is the right broadcasting term. That would be interesting to go back and listen to.
It would. I wish, I wish I had a record of that, because it was a very memorable moment. I think we recorded a few of our halftime broadcasts, but I don't think that was ever broadcast. I'm sure maybe some person around the East Texas region might have been recording the radio at that moment, so maybe tucked away in someone's basement or something.
Wow,
There's a cassette tape.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a reel-to-reel or something anachronistic like
whatever
that.
we used back then. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then shortly, I guess a semester or two after that, I decided to change my major to psychology. And I ended up getting a BA in psychology, and then I had enough hours to get a second major in radio and television.
Now, was your decision to change majors informed by anything in particular?
Well, I always, liked the idea of helping people, and I felt that I could, I don't know how to say this, but I felt like I could do a little bit more with my undergraduate career. So, okay. So I switched then, and I had a so we had I think it was actually still called behavior modification then. We had a course on that, and we read 2 Skinner books as even in an undergraduate course. It was about behaviorism and beyond freedom and dignity, and we wrote commentaries every week, and that was sort of my first exposure to it, and I really liked the behavioral approach just because it gave you practical tools on how to actually change behavior.
Yeah.
Right? And so that was my main draw to it. And so this commentary, this practice of writing commentaries started in that class, and it actually carried on to grad school and on to UNR. And that practice, doing it over and over and over again, is really B-Side 21 in a different form, I would think. That skill of writing frequent commentaries all the time really builds that skill of writing things quickly, basically.
I see.
So
you're an undergraduate, you're, getting exposure to some introductory behavior analysis courses and things like that, reading Skinner reading the primary, texts of Skinner and things like that, which is, something that you don't see all that frequently at that level, at least from my experience. And then you decide to go to graduate school to further your study in this.
Yeah. So I first stayed at SFA, and I got my master's in general experimental psychology. So I had a broad base in psychology as a broad field. And also when I was there, I got a minor in school and behavioral psychology. Okay. So the psychology department there had a course or two in behavior analysis. It was more of a generalist type of program. But over in the human services college, they had a couple of behavior analysts over there that were doing some cool stuff related to behavior analysis and education. And so that's really, I got to sink my teeth more into research there. And there was a guy there, I think he's retired now. His name was Dr. Chris Ninnis, and he was doing some RFT research. And so we published a study. It ended up being published in 2006 in Journal of Applied Behavior Analysis. And so we came up with a way to teach trigonometry, specifically relations between trigonomic equations and their graphical representations, using relational frame theory. And if anyone out there is familiar with RFT, when you apply it to learning situations, the basic idea is you get more bang for your buck, essentially. So you can train a few basic relations. Hopefully you will get a situation where people start deriving hundreds of untrained relations for free. And that's basically what we found. So that's where it all started. There was another guy there, Dr. Robin Rumpf, and he was really into social issues and the group BFSR, Behaviors for Social Responsibility. And they have a journal that I'm on the editorial board for, which is Behavior and Social Issues. And so that was always one of my first interests in behavior analysis, was related to social issues, and because I think in Skinner's books that I just mentioned, and some of his other ones too, he was really always had his eye on how can behavior analysis change the broader world for the better. And so that's really what initially hooked me in to that. So,
and so I imagine the RFT, I guess the introduction to that led to looking to Nevada for your doctoral work. Is that an assumption correct?
Yes, it is. It definitely brought UNR into focus for me, and I applied there, and that's where I ended up going. I actually applied to 4 or 5 different places, and for all of you out there who are applying to grad schools, I got rejected by all of the places except for UNR, and I ended up getting my PhD there. So, and really it's just because, the main thing when you're applying to grad schools is, are you a fit with the people? Do your interests match the interests of the people there? So
yeah, I remember that experience. I applied to Western Michigan, Auburn, and West Virginia, and when I was finishing up at the University of New Hampshire, where I did my undergraduate, this was all pre-BCBA stuff, and there were very few places for behavior analysis work, and so the options were rather limited. And I remember I really enjoyed my years at Auburn, so this is not a slam on them or anything like that, but I really wanted to go to West Virginia, and that was the only one I didn't get into. So I remember that, I think, as you said, it was more of a match. They were at the time looking for individuals who were very much into the, for lack of a better term, serious EAB research, and they wanted people with programming and natural science experience and things like that. And of course, I took the history of math in college, so they were like, "Oh yeah, maybe not." So anywho, UNR seems always to be like that kind of bastion or birthplace of the ACT and RFT work, and we and I'm not sure exactly what sequence this interview will fall into, but as I've indicated to you in previous conversations, I've got kind of a budding interest in ACT and RFT, but at this point I kind of only know enough to be dangerous, if you will. So starting to fumble around with the terms a little bit, but I'm definitely have already interviewed some people and have some other guests come on talk about ACT as well. So this will fit in nicely. But what I really want to talk about is kind of how you evolved from coming out of Reno, and what was the course in terms of developing B-Side 21, or for those, and I'll mention this, I would have mentioned this already in the introduction, but behavioral sciences in the 21st century.org, or as you like to say, bside21.org. When did you kind of craft that idea? Tell me the timeline, if you will.
It came about somewhere around 2011 or 2012. And I did that in the process of writing my dissertation, simply to have a break from the dissertation.
Because you didn't have enough to do.
Quite honestly. Well, it's not so much that. It's kind of like you get to this point in the PhD where you've been so immersed in this technical academic literature for a long time, and then you're writing a dissertation, and it's kind of consuming all your time. So the blog, and when you're in a PhD program, you're so immersed in it, you're like just thinking about behavior analysis all the time, basically, I felt like. And so I started this blog just as a way to kind of get out some of those thoughts or verbal behavior, if you will. And I say it was kind of a break because writing a blog, and now my quickly growing team of contributing writers, I think I have 7 now, and there's like 4 more getting ready to come on board soon. One common theme that everybody likes about it is you can have fun in your writing, basically. You know, you're not writing in an academic format. We're not writing for our target audience isn't necessarily the Ivory Tower or academicians. You know, we're trying to reach everybody. We're trying to reach the public. And so it gives you an opportunity to loosen up with your language, write in a more casual style, almost sort of, you know, like a magazine-ish type of style.
Yeah, that's fair.
Fun with it, basically. So,
that's at least how I perceive it. You know, and it's I think the word magazine kind of popped in my mind as I was, you know, kind of trying to figure out, okay, where does this fit in the context of behavioral media in general? Do you have any sense about your circulation or reach or your readership in terms of, you know, who is your target demographic, or, you know, or as they say sometimes in the online world, who's your avatar? You know, who's the typical reader or what have you? Or they use that term in podcasting, actually. You know, so what's your sense of that?
Yeah, well, in terms of numbers, I have ongoing 3-month averages of numbers, and so the 2 primary dashboard measures I keep track of, I look at multiple times a day on Google Analytics, is right now the site is averaging over 38,000 views a month and averaging over 20,000 users a month. So, of course, you have some users that are doing multiple things. And it's generating more and more revenue. Seems to be growing exponentially right now, mainly through advertising and our job board, and starting to do some consulting work now through the site as well. And in terms of the demographic, the site is really, if you go to the About page on the site, it kind of lays out the mission statement, if you will, of the site and specific goals related to that. And so the site is really aimed to, in a short phrase, to disseminate behavior analysis. And to do so, I kind of see it as serving Skinner's original vision for the science. And I think he said this in Behavior of Organisms, which was, he kind of laid out behavior analysis as it should be a comprehensive science of behavior or psychology, or whatever you want to call it, and it's full of complexity. And so the aim here is to cover, sometimes I'm worried the site is too broad, but as of right now, getting tons of awesome feedback, so I'm going to keep on this direction of basically trying to cover the gamut of behavior analysis, all the way from practitioner issues. So we have a few writers in particular who specialize in that and write about behavior analysts working in schools, and have an article about pivotal response treatment. And then so it covers the spectrum all the way to up, what some people would say, up in the clouds theory and philosophy issues. So, for example, at UNR, I guess one of the things I feel like they're known for is their emphasis on theory and philosophy, and particularly with Linda Hayes being there. And kind of one thing that they, one of the realizations, I guess, or one of the things that they, or she, since she teaches those classes, sort of instill is the difference between events and constructs. So a construct is our verbal reaction to events. And so basically, if you walk down that road, what you basically come to, and I'm not expecting all these listeners to come to this realization right now, but what she would say and what others like interbehaviorists would say and things like that is that, you know, reinforcement isn't real. All these terms are not actually real things in the world. And so we have an article talking about that. Its title is Reinforcement Isn't Real out there. So that's just to give you, if I had to think of the most extreme end of the spectrum on that, it would be that.
Is that the one that...
I cover everything between.
Is that the one that came out this week that talked about the behavior analyst article? Am I thinking of that right one? There's there was
one that just came out that talked about positive versus negative reinforcement.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. So that touched on an article. It was, I think it might have been a special issue, or there was at least a series of articles almost 10 years ago now, actually, and the behavior analysts that were actually bringing back an argument that Jack Michael started in the 70s, suggesting that the distinction between positive and negative reinforcement was pretty much useless and that we should do away with it.
Right. We're all just being in some aversive deprivation state of one stripe or another. That's at least what I took from that.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was an example that I cited in that article that they talked about where they talked about some study done a long time ago where if you put, I think it was rats in a cold operant chamber and they press a lever, which adds heat to the environment, you might call that positive reinforcement because it's adding heat. Mm-hmm. But looked at it in another way, it's also removing cold. So which do you go with?
Right, you're terminating an aversive condition.
Right, and then, and so they drew some interesting implications that I highlighted, talking about, you know, our main categories of functional analysis. You know, one of those categories is attention-maintained behavior, and they raise the question, is it adding attention in the terms of positive reinforcement, or are you removing loneliness?
Yeah.
You know, so sure. It's interesting to think about.
Well, I think the neat thing about that article is it is an example of what you just described as one of the many different things that you have on the website, you know, so you can have these kind of theoretical articles. I think that's what's that under the tab you call the Ivory Tower. And for those who haven't been to the site, and if you haven't, you should probably press pause and go go check it out, bsci21.org. But there's different tabs with these different categories. There's practitioner issues and, you know, kind of these philosophical issues and OBM stuff, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going off of memory, of course. But so it is, you can kind of go, you know, take what you want from it. And I think that's one of the cool things about that website. So you can kind of throw out a, for lack of a better word, a controversial headline, but it's, you know, it sounds like, in my experience reading the articles, it's done so in a playful way. It's not like you're trying to start up, you know, an intellectual street fight or anything like that.
Right, and that's actually, I don't have very many requirements for bringing on contributing writers, but one of the requirements I have is that articles are not written in an inflammatory tone. Mm-hmm. So, because for a variety of reasons, one is kind of for liability reasons, but beside that, it really affects how the article comes across, and people might interpret the article and the site as being biased.
Sure.
And so it just creates a whole host of issues. So those categories, I was just going to say those categories you're mentioning are ABA practice, which I think is our largest category right now. And then business/OBM and society, which talks about, that primarily focuses on current events in the world, like ISIS and things like that. And then we have some interviews, some lifestyle things, like we have an article on martial arts in there, and then Ivory Tower.
Yes.
So.
Pretty cool. Good stuff. So one question I have is, you have all this stuff, and I guess you kind of answered this already by talking about some of your contributors, but, one of my questions, how do you crank out this content so much? I mean, how many articles do you have coming out on a weekly basis? I mean, that's got to be, is it an intense dissemination cycle, or I don't know if that's the proper kind of publishing world, or can you give us a peek behind the curtain, I guess is what I'm saying, and what does that look like without giving away the secret sauce, of course, but what
the secret sauce, that's going to cost you something.
Yeah, that's right.
Sauce. So on a good month, I think I might have had a month where I did an article a day. I'm not exactly sure. That was originally the goal, and that's kind of the ideal, but what it typically comes out to is somewhere in the 20s per month, per number of articles per month. And so let's rewind for a second. So I started the site in grad school. Then I graduated my PhD in 2013, went to work at UNT. I stopped doing the website, focused on my real job at that point, let it go for a year or so. And then last January, somewhere in 2015, then I brought it back as an official business. And so I started that, and I was writing every single article. The goal, the vision was kind of one article a day. But most of the time I would take some breaks, but it's definitely in the 20s for the most part. But now, as we get more and more contributing writers, that takes the pressure off of me a little bit, which is nice. And so I can focus on other things like marketing and stuff like that. But it's still I'm still definitely writing the majority of the articles. And there's a few tricks to it, I guess, or a few... I'll give you a taste of the secret sauce.
All right. All right, just between us, okay?
Yeah, no one else. So one thing I do is through WordPress, the site's run on WordPress, and you can save up all of these drafts of articles that you can come back to later. And so one thing I do is just get on Google, and I guess I'll have to have some secrets, but there's a few search terms that I've found are pretty helpful in finding stories to write about.
Okay.
And so the main sources are news sites, basically, the news tab on Google, and then journals, because a lot of our articles, mainly the ones I write, tend to refer to peer-reviewed studies and recapping those. So essentially, I'll go through those in my super secret search terms, and I've learned to really stockpile. So if I found a story, on Google News that looks interesting, it could be a current event or something that's actually happening in the behavior analysis world. I'll take the link and I'll save it as a draft. I'll write a quick title for it, and I'll just tuck it away.
Okay,
for
and
later. So
if I can just pause you there for a second, for those who aren't familiar with websites and things like that, and I only know, to use one of my favorite terms, I only know enough to be dangerous myself, because I just, I'm kind of dipping my toe into this water, but WordPress is what you build, one of the more common ways these days to build a website. It's the architecture, if you will, or the... I don't know if app is the right word, but it's the way in which you lay out a website. It's all the things that are going on kind of behind the scenes. So when you open up B-Side 21, the way everything is laid out, and the way the articles are, and the tabs that you click on, and the ads and all those things are all set up in this program, or this architecture known as WordPress. Is that fair enough? Because I know you've got years more, exponentially more experience. But I just want to pause to make sure if no one's into that, I want to make sure we're all kind of on the same page. So keep going.
Okay, well, and along those lines, I'll just say, just in a nutshell, these days it's super easy for anyone to have a great looking website, and you don't really have to know any programming to do it. But we can come back to that later.
All right, I'll have to hit you up with some advice because mine needs some help.
Yeah, no problem. So basically, I go through Google looking at articles, news stories, and then some journals. And basically, I just find stuff that looks cool. And that's actually, I found to be the best gauge, how I kind of self-observe my own reaction to things that I see in the news or journal articles that I see. And if I sort of get excited when I see it, then I think it probably has a good chance that other people will get excited. Okay. And it'll probably have a good viewership. So I just get all those links, and I basically just create a stockpile in the back end of WordPress. You just have this little section where you can write articles, and you can, either publish articles or have drafts. So right now I have about 23 drafts.
I was just going to ask you how many drafts you had open
sitting
right
there.
now.
So, and they're basically just a link in the body of the article and then a quick title to remind me what it was. Mm-hmm. So that I found has been a huge help in the process to have that stockpile there, because it is kind of time consuming to go through the internet world and try to find stuff that you think people will actually read and share and things like that. So
I see.
Now, that's the general process. Yeah.
Do you now I know in the internet world a mailing list is everything, right? And mm-hmm. Do you? And sometimes that's kind of like almost like a status measure. Oh, how big is your mailing list? That sort of thing. Do you have a lot of people on your list?
I do. Yeah, I kind of regard that, excuse me, as the long-term lifeblood of a website or a blog, mm-hmm. Because those people get. Yes, I have a growing subscriber list. We're up to 1,200 subscribers.
Nice.
Right now, and so every time an article comes out, they get an email sent to their inbox with that, and so that growing subscriber list is, if anybody out there is creating a website or a blog, you need to have email subscribers. Mm-hmm. I firmly believe that.
Yep.
So, and you can go onto Google Analytics, and I can bring up traffic from email specifically going all the way back to January, and you can see, the line going up. So a greater and greater proportion of the traffic is coming from there, which means you can spend less time sharing on social media and things like that. So
right. You can just blast it out to the people that who are already in the pipeline, who are already interested, and who know, like, and trust you as they mm-hmm. to engage in some marketing verbal behavior.
Yeah,
nice. So what do you suppose the role of, and I guess we've kind of touched on this, but that the B-Side 21 is one way in which behavior analysis can play a role in popular media. Do you see other avenues in terms of both dissemination and marketing? Sometimes behavior analysis obviously made leaps and bounds over the years, especially in the application to the treatment of autism spectrum disorders and things like that. But mm-hmm. I also, at the same time, I also hear people talking about that behavior analysis needs to do a better job marketing, and things like mm-hmm. that. And so I see this as kind of one way to do that. Are there other endeavors, in terms of, I'm speaking more in terms of like the internet world and things like that you're seeing from your point of view of running a media and enterprise?
Yeah, well, actually, it really seems like there's a whole movement cropping up right now as we speak, like this year even, right around the same time I really got serious about my website of, not only my site, but other sites like Behavior Babe, for example, comes to mind as one of the more established ones. And there's another one called Parenting with ABA, which is run by Leanne Page. And there's a lot of different sites out there that are all cropping up right now that I think is really cool. And, people I celebrated my 10th ABBA conference last year.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like every year you go there, and also in other places, people are always talking about how we need to disseminate behavior analysis. But no one seems to be doing anything about it. And some people write journal articles about it, but the journals are the last place you want to be disseminating behavior analysis, quite honestly, because no one reads journals.
Right.
And you'll just be preaching to the choir, basically.
Sure.
And so what I felt, kind of another factor, I guess, in starting my site, and I feel that the other people I mentioned probably feel the same way, is that behavior analysis really doesn't have... We do journals really well, but we don't do other things like magazines and other types of media like that too well. And you go on other websites, there's science websites and things, and they're recapping studies and science journals and stuff like that, but behavior analysis really doesn't have too much of that. So there's definitely room to grow in that area. And I really think the internet, and with things like WordPress, and there's some other ones out there too. I personally like WordPress. I would recommend that to anyone, but it's so easy these days. Everyone, if they put a little work into it with a minimal of technical knowledge, can have a voice and reach lots of people. So it's kind of a democratizing. It's bringing power to the masses, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, the vehicle. I guess in defense of, the status quo, if you will, is that, I guess prior to the availability of these avenues for disseminate, I mean, there were fewer options for dissemination, I think, prior to the widespread availability of, starting your own blog or what have you, or, it's kind of one of the reasons I want to start this podcast. I actually thought I would start a blog, and realized that wow, creating consistent content is really hard. It's one of those things. It's like, wow, this is certainly not my day job. So this is more of a hobby than anything else. So the tools that are out there to do this are certainly easy to come by, and I guess I would say that if I'm able to put a website together, then pretty much anyone can do it. So, because I don't have much in the way of technical expertise.
It's the first website. And just wanted to say the first website I ever made was probably in 2007 or 8. It was for the Nevada Association for Behavior Analysis. I remember even then, I was using Macromedia program that you had to download on your computer to build the websites, and then you had to have FileZilla to upload the files onto the site and all this BS, basically. But today, you don't need any of that stuff.
Right.
It's completely contained on the internet, and it's so user-friendly, and, anyway, so it's super easy.
Yeah, definitely. I know you said you're bringing on more writers. Do you have any other future plans for BCBA-D that you want to share?
There's kind of some big news, actually, in the very near future, maybe today, or definitely by next week. I'm turning it into an LLC. Mm-hmm. And so I'll be creating BCBA-D Media LLC. And so this BCBA-D phrase has really kind of caught on, and it's become a recognizable thing.
A brand, as they would say.
Yeah, exactly, a brand. All the conferences I go to now, people are coming up to me and talking to me about it. And so anyway, creating the Media LLC, and then it's going to own BCBA-D21.org, and it will also own, I'm acquiring another publication called Behavior Analysis Quarterly, and its website is baquarterly.com. It's currently owned by Dr. Ben Witz. He and I went to grad school together at UNR, and he's also the editor of it. And so this opportunity has come up for me to take over basically the business part of it, and he's going to stay on as the editor. And I think both of them together will be a nice combination, because bsci21.org is like the daily blog, right? Mm-hmm. And those articles tend to be shorter in content, but Behavior Analysis Quarterly, or BAQ, is if you go to the website, it is a magazine. You open it up and it has a reader, and you can. It's literally a digital magazine that comes out on a quarterly basis. And so those articles, there's a good opportunity with that outlet to get much more in depth on certain topics. So I think the two together they go together pretty nicely. So we'll see where that leads.
I see. And not to, venture into waters that are, kind of impolite or none of my business or whatever, but I guess one of the things I'm wondering about is, do you see this as as your eventual day job? I know prior to when we hit the record button, you're telling me about different things that you're involved in, in terms mm-hmm. of the day-to-day stuff. Mm-hmm. But I guess one of the things that's kind of I'm curious about, and it's kind of fascinating to see that the evolution of the field are these kind of media entrepreneurial type of endeavors. So is this a viable concern, if you will, or a going concern, I guess, as they say in business circles?
I don't know if there's any concern about anything, but
no. I mean, by that I mean, okay. Let me rephrase the question. That this is something that you can make a living at, or one can potentially, make a living at.
That's the ideal goal. Yes.
Okay.
If I could do this full time, I would. And the success I've had with bsci21.org has been completely mind blowing, and we're getting more and more and better established contributing writers. Our most recent one, Sarah Cooper-Schmidt, is also a writer for the Huffington Post and does TEDx talks and things like that. And it's just clear that we're reaching more and more people all the time. People I talked to someone yesterday on the phone, and they said that she was talking to her friend, and her friend, actually I was talking to one of my writers. We weren't talking on the phone, we were messaging through Facebook with one of my writers, and she said one of her friends needs to catch up on her B-Side 21 readings, because she reads it like religiously kind of a thing. And then I just hear stories about people in Italy sharing the articles and everything. So the success that the site has had is super encouraging. And I've just noticed for myself that every little success I get from entrepreneurial behavior is hugely reinforcing for me. So if it can be my day job, it will.
Nice. That's pretty cool. Now, speaking of being recognized at conferences and things like that, you just came back from Japan at the ABII, as it were, the international ABA.
International conference, yeah.
How was that? Was that your first time over to that neck of the woods?
It was. I always wanted to go to Japan, and it is now. I've been to a few foreign countries now, mainly in Europe and the Bahamas. Bahamas is basically like America, but Japan was definitely my favorite foreign country. And the people there, we here in Texas, we like to think we're among the friendliest people in America, but no one in the United States holds a candle to the Japanese in terms of friendliness or etiquette. It's just mind-blowing. People would we'd be on the street, kind of obvious that we weren't quite sure where to go, and people would just walk us to where we needed to go, just on the street.
Spontaneously.
Yeah, and everything is super clean in Japan also. And there's no trash cans anywhere either, which is interesting. So someone told me yesterday. Yeah.
It sounds like a Seinfeld joke.
I know.
Where does it go?
It just goes up and out somewhere. Someone told me yesterday that the Japanese, when they're raised to carry their own trash with them. So I don't know how accurate that is or not, but it was a very clean place, a very polite place. Always felt welcome as a foreigner there, and I would definitely go back. And in Kyoto, which is where the conference was, it's known for its temples. They have like 1,000 temples or something. And so I checked a lot of those out, and those were totally amazing, like 1,000 years old. And then there was the conference, so I guess I should talk about that a little bit.
Oh, you can keep talking about Kyoto, that's fine. You probably had a lot of good food there, I would imagine, as well.
I did, yeah. I had the largest, they give you, at least in my hotel, the largest pieces of toast that I've ever seen before, which was kind of funny. And then they put a big dollop of cream on it. It almost tastes like ice cream. And then, anyway, it was really good. But the conference, I was invited to be a part of a panel there, which was organized by Michelle Kelly. And the topic was being a socially savvy scientist. So it was, the basic focus was behavior analysts using social media to disseminate the field. And so we discussed that and our views on that and ethical implications of that as well. And, one of the main points from that is that it's actually written into our ethical code in the BACB that we must disseminate the field. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many people know or remember that, but we're actually ethically obliged to do that. So, and then shortly after that,
can I just,
right when I got home, yeah.
One comment on that is that it's funny, the ways in which you can disseminate, and certainly there's like the Facebook ABA groups and all sorts of things like that. Mm-hmm. I wish that encouragement was highlighted more frequently, because I think there's also at the same time a reluctance to put yourself out there, because everyone,
yes,
especially when you go see a good speaker or a great presentation and things like that. I don't know about you, but sometimes I'm like, oh man, that was great. I don't know if I could do something that well or something like, and so there's a little bit of a, mm-hmm. and it's been a huge kind of, it's something I've had to kind of work on to put aside to start, for example, this podcast, kind of putting your thoughts out there and things like that really takes a little bit of, fortitude, if you will. And so
it does.
I think that as a field, there's that, yes, we have that, but there's these events that perhaps are make putting yourself out there, for lack of a better word, something aversive to think about. Getting back to our ACT skills, that definitely could lead to some experiential avoidance.
Mm-hmm, for sure. Yeah, that's definitely something that I had to deal with at first. And I've talked to some other people who have similar sites to mine, and they have said similar things. And it really doesn't bother me now after 10 months of doing it mm-hmm. as a serious website. But definitely for the first few months, there was definitely that concern, like, oh my God, like hundreds of people are going to see this. And yeah, you're putting yourself out there, that's for sure. But you just have to, one thing that helps with that is just making sure you can back up whatever you say. And you're just not standing on your soapbox on a rant or something like that.
Right, saying, OT's stupid.
So, yeah.
I'm kidding. Okay, well, no. Yeah, did you ever get any like crazy, comments in the comment sections? Anyone like really, give you like a really off the wall, like, other than spam or something like that,
Yeah.
what sort of
One good thing
feedback are
about
you get? Did you get any like
WordPress.
really, what was your craziest piece of feedback, I guess, is it all, or do you all just have raving fans?
Vast majority of it is positive. There was one guy um, who we went on for a while, and it was really between him and the writer of the article. I can't remember. It was an article that one of my writers, Chelsea Willite, wrote, who actually is an Emmy award-winning journalist in a past life. She did a morning show and won an Emmy for it, and now she's a writer and a grad student at UNR. And she wrote it on why behavior analysts should check out things that people are doing in other fields, something along those lines. And so there was one person in particular who took issue with that, and there was a lengthy back and forth, mainly between her and him, on that. But besides that, it's really been all positive. So
now as editor-in-chief, do you, did you have to shut that down at a certain point, or if you don't want to refrain from commenting on that, I completely understand. I'm just kind of curious how this whole thing works, or did it just kind of die its own death? Or...
Well, I can approve and delete all comments on the site itself, and Chelsea and I just talked one day, and she felt like she was reinforcing this person's comments by replying, and so we just decided to put it on extinction.
I see.
So that's how that ended.
I see. Very.
But you're talking about ACT, right? You kind of just have to. One of the things I did is I just kind of had to realize that that's an inevitable part of putting yourself out there. Mm-hmm. It's just part of the process, and so if you just go in expecting that to happen sometimes, then things will go a lot better.
I see. Well, sage advice. Well, I think, is there anything else that you want to leave us with about BCI-21, or anything else that you're involved in that I haven't asked thus far? Excuse me.
We will. For the immediate future, I'm looking to start creating some online CE activities through the site. So people can look for those in the near future. And, we have lots of advertising opportunities. We have a consulting page on there with me and two other guys who offer consulting services through the site. And that's starting to pick up. And we have a job board on there that's starting to get more and more attention. And it's just growing. And, if you approach this as a business, you have to look at the money side of it. And that's definitely growing. And all things are pointing up at this point. So.
When you mentioned the consulting piece, are you consulting to, what's the nature of the consulting? Is it to other people who are, kind of creating their own media platforms, or is it, kind of what we typically think of as consulting and behavior analysis, or what's the scope, if you will?
It's actually a wide variety of things. We have a lot of different things mentioned on the consulting page, but right now, I'm consulting to someone in Europe who has a monthly newsletter that she sends out, trying to disseminate behavior analysis in the UK specifically. Mm-hmm. And so I'm working with her a few hours a month on that, thinking about not only I'm helping her with copy editing type stuff, but also kind of broader goals and the mission of her endeavor, and just kind of getting people, one of the most important things that I learned in my doctoral program, and that anybody, I think, should have, especially if they're trying to do their own business or anything, really, is to always ask yourself the question, why? Like, why, if you go and do something, why are you doing it? And just be able to have solid answers for that. So just that simple exercise can go a long way.
Well,
so in terms of consulting, that's what I'm doing right now.
I see. Well, I guess that's one of my questions was, what's some sage advice, and so I guess asking the why question probably is it would fall into that category.
Yeah. You did send me some questions earlier, and one question on there, I don't know if you're going to get to it, was, would I have advice for a newly minted BCBA?
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. Yeah, would it involve asking the why question?
I think there's something even more fundamental than that, and this was a point of conversation in the panel I was in Japan that I brought up, which is I have this concern, particularly with people who are heavy on the practitioner side of behavior analysis, that people are starting to view behavior analysis as a set of techniques or a set of procedures. And I would just guard against that. And I don't think that was ever what it was meant to be. So my recommendation to any new BCBA is to see it as a formless science. That's what I see it as. So to focus on, Beowulf and Risley kind of focus on this too, is to look at it as a set of principles that can be applied in limitless and formless ways. So the procedures can be whatever, if they change behavior and they're based on our principles. And that's that. So I feel sometimes people get too locked into particular forms and procedures of doing things.
So it's more than the VB map and analog functional analyses.
Exactly.
just checking. Okay. All right. I got some work to do. No, just kidding.
Yeah. So that would be my advice question.
Very good. Well, Todd Ward of bsci21.org, thank you very much for your time. This has been a really interesting conversation.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care.
All right. Bye.
Okay, folks, thanks for joining me for that conversation with Dr. Todd Ward of bsci21.org. Be sure to check out that website. It's pretty cool. It's it's bsci21.org. A couple of quick announcements before we go here. I have the honor and privilege of speaking with Doctors Todd Ward and Amanda Kelly at ABAI in Chicago in a couple of weeks. So we will be talking about professional and ethical considerations for disseminating behavior analysis and current research through social media. And we are on panel number 49. So if you search your program book, you can get all the info in terms of where we'll be and what day and time and things like that. And I'll also post that on the website and Facebook group. So I'm really honored to be sharing the stage with those guys. And for those of you who haven't been following along with previous podcast episodes, I do have an interview with Amanda Kelly in session number 4 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. So if you go to behavioralobservations.com and scroll down to session 4, Amanda Kelly, you'll see that episode there, and you can give that a listen. And she talks about all things social media and whatnot. So we have a pretty fun discussion kicking around those topics. So I think that's pretty much it. Again, thanks for listening to the show. Thank you for writing in and saying hello. A lot of you guys, as I mentioned earlier, have been doing that through the contact page. And we'll see you in the next session of the Behavioral Observations podcast. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.